Over the logs was spread a layer of palm fronds, and over that a layer of earth rolled flat with a stone roller. After every rain, the Mesopotamians climbed up on their flat roofs to re-roll them, as some still do today. Many householders even raised vegetable gardens in the earth of their roofs. Some houses had, over one or more rooms, roofs in the form of corbelled domes. We looked at that earlier. These domes, like clusters of magnified beehives, are still seen in Syrian villages. A blank wall shielded the householder from the eager eyes of tax gatherers and other royal agents. Some men living under despotism managed to get rich, even though they were not members of the governmental apparatus. Such men, merchants for example, were careful to hide their wealth from the despot's agents, lest they be beggared by sudden tax claims, or slain on some trumped-up charge to give the autocrat excuse for taking all. An Iranian proverb expressed it, quote, "If you are being fattened by someone, you may expect very quickly to be slaughtered by him." Because of the scarcity of fuel in Mesopotamia, kiln-dried bricks were rarely used in private houses. As a result, the householder was kept busy during the winter trying to patch up his house as fast as the rains dissolved it away. When, once in a generation, the task became hopeless, he brought out his movables, knocked down the walls, leveled and smoothed off the debris to make a new floor, and built another house on the ruins of the old. As the early cities of the ancient watershed kingdoms had neither sewers, garbage disposal, nor trash collection, rubbish accumulated and constantly raised the level of the streets. Older houses could be distinguished by the fact that their entrances were below street level. This was particularly true of temples. Most large temples stood in a sacred precinct, the temenos, surrounded by a wall. Because the temple was more substantially built than private houses, it lasted longer. Also, as the temenos was holy, it was kept free of rubbish, so that the level of its grounds did not rise with that of the street outside. In time, a temple and its enclosure might almost be buried from sight as the street level rose around them. Thus, cities originally built on the plain slowly rose on hills of their own debris. Today, Iraq is dotted with these hills, or tells, T-E-L-L-S, tells, scores of which still await the picks, shovels, and whisk brooms of archaeologists. As the city's population grew, traffic congestion grew faster. Hence, the ancient metropolises were forced, like modern cities, to regulate traffic. The winding alley village layout also aggravated the problems of waste disposal, fire protection, and law enforcement as the city waxed larger. So it says when they laid out a new city, they kept at least one area clear of buildings for a marketplace and reserved another space for temples and palaces. The usual pattern was a gridiron or a checkerboard with streets crossing at right angles. The cities of the Indus Valley showed this plan, as did some Mesopotamian and Egyptian cities. Peoples much given to sending out colonies, such as the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and the Romans, had many occasions for laying out cities in this manner. A ceremony marked the founding of a city. The head man traced out the line of the wall, often by plowing a furrow with gaps for the gates. This line then became invested with magical properties. Now it says modern planners like to have a bit of a diagonal cutting across to increase efficiency a bit, but that was the best thing they could come up with back then, was just a gridiron. In locating a city, ancient town planners were often torn between two choices: to put the city at the bottom of a valley for nearness to water, or to place it on a hilltop to make it easy to defend. The choice depended upon the likelihood of attack. The survival of the hilltop city or fortress depended on getting water when besieged. Some cities solved the problem thus. When a spring flowed from the hill below the walls, the builders drove an inclined tunnel from inside the walls down through the rock to the spring, which was then walled in so that it could be approached only by this tunnel. Sometimes another tunnel carried the water inwards under the fortified place, where it filled an underground cistern. Very, very elaborate. Alright, we're going to skip down a bit now. We're going to go talking about flood problems and so on. Because men tried to keep the river in one place by building up the banks with levees, the river rises higher and higher above the surrounding country, and a flood is more destructive when it does come. This is like our fire prevention today. There's nothing else you can do. You've got to stop the fire before it burns people's houses down. But at least they weren't going just out in the middle of the desert trying to prevent the river from flooding. But around in their cities and stuff, they just build it up higher and higher. So eventually really, really high water comes. It's staying inside. A washout finally does happen. And what do we have? We have something that probably goes down as one of the greatest floods in all time, and probably ended up in the Bible. Flood problems were more acute in Mesopotamia than in Egypt. For one thing, the Tigris and Euphrates carry about 5 times as much silt for a given volume as the Nile. Hence, the bottoms of these rivers rise faster, and they change their courses more often. For another, they are less regular than the Nile in the date and degree and the rise of their waters. Their high level occur in the spring, an awkward time, too late to help with winter crops, and too early for summer crops. Therefore, much storage of water is needed to raise good crops in this fertile flat land. Although the Euphrates is much the longer of the two rivers, the Tigris carries over twice as much water as its sister. It is also swifter and more unpredictable. Moreover, being faster, it digs a deeper trench and so is less easily used for irrigation. Because the leading civilization of antiquity arose in broad river valleys, and because floods are the deadliest natural catastrophe in such valleys, these civilizations all developed flood legends as part of their mythology. It's not a coincidence that everyone has a flood legend and that the Bible has a flood legend. Not a coincidence. They are all the same phenomenon. And the Bible is just another myth. The Sumerians had a legend about the pious Ziusudra, who by building an ark saved himself and his family from a great flood sent by the gods. The legend evolved down the centuries and passed from folk to folk, so that Ziusudra became the Utnapishtim of the Assyrians, the Noah of the Hebrews, and the Deucalion of the Greeks. They all had a version. Everybody. Across the yawning gulf of 5,000 years, we see the sun-browned Sumerians beginning the endless task of breaking the rivers and the plain to the use of man. As century followed century, Mesopotamia came to be Damascened by an azure web of canals, which tamed the mighty Euphrates, clothed the desert in rippling fields of golden grain, and moistened the roots of date palms planted along their banks in endless rows. In the 3rd millennium BC, King Entemana of Lagash built an especially large canal, which ran from the Tigris south along the 46th meridian to the Euphrates. This canal can still be traced by a line of lakes, streams, and marshes. That's impressive. Keeping up such a canal system in Mesopotamia presented special difficulties. Because of the lack of timber and stone, there was no easy way to reinforce the canal banks. When these banks were simply made of piled up mud, they easily fell into disrepair. We skip a bit. It talks about how their domestic goats would scramble up and down the banks and were the constant scourge of the ancient world, ruining the banks of their ditches and stuff, and they always had to build them up against these. And we go down a bit. Lacking stone and wood, the Mesopotamians used cane reeds, tied in bundles or woven into mats as reinforcing material. They used these reeds not only in their canal work, but also in house building. Now I find this fascinating, very interesting. Therefore, Mesopotamian towns maintained a curious institution, the municipal marsh, a patch of swamp deliberately kept as a wetland where useful reeds could grow. So, run down to the swamp and get us some reeds. You have to have it. It's like having gas stations in your city. You have to have a swamp to get reeds from. Other civilizations around the world had a different attitude towards these. The Greeks emptied their swamps. They had this vague feeling that there were harmful vapors that came from it. Malaria. These people kept it. You have to have a swamp, a municipal swamp. Mesopotamian irrigation was of the basin type, like that of the Egyptian delta.